Okay, welcome to CIS 5620. Today is Tuesday, 9/8/2020, and hopefully this session will not last long. And the agenda for today is to briefly go through the course materials and then talk about the changes in the assignments and walk you through how you're going to be submitting the assignment and also give you some hints about the assignment itself. So I understand some of you are having some problem with getting your group members, and that's why I decided to change how you're going to be doing the discussion. So if you read my email from last week, I say that for the discussion, we're going to be using the submission, a different submission link for VoiceThread. So that's how we will be working on the discussion board. We will leave the groups for the research paper because I think you need to work together and at least learn from each other a little bit. And it's going to be also very easier for me to provide more feedback when you're working as a group. So most of the concept that you're going to be working on moving forward, you probably have already gone through them. And I'll briefly go back to week 1 on the introduction on the part of the learn, a day in the life of a project manager. Most of you had very well detailed answers from the interview that you did, and you are actually able to see what project managers do, how they ended up in their position, and things like that. And I'm sure if you had read this article, A Day in the Life of a Project Manager, you are actually able to see some of those things coming back. Another point is on the statistics on project managers, what they do, and most of the project managers actually told you they do a lot of communication, checking email, and making sure that everything is working. So that was what was expected from those interviews. These videos here, if you go through them, if you have not, I'll encourage you to please go back, look at them, watch them, and most of them are going to be talking about the same concept that we have either mentioned or will be mentioning. So from today, we'll be looking at what you call the process group and the knowledge areas. This is the heart of project management. Any project will have to go through these 5 main processes and what you call the knowledge areas. And from now moving forward, we'll be looking at each knowledge area each week. The triple constraint, we talked about that, and most of the project managers from your report, they say that they make sure that the project meets the budget and is under control and the scope and things like that. So these here, they walk you through that. And then some of the terms that the project managers use, I think some of them were talking about the scope and also some of the software that they use. So telling you to shadow somebody, mentorship, saying that you have to have emotional intelligence. Those were some of the things that some of the project managers that you interviewed were talking about. So it's the same concept that you'll come across when you go through these videos. Same thing, you can read this report if you want, and if you ever want to take some certification. I think some of the project managers say they are not certified, but they say they have a lot of industry experience. But another way in which you can prove that you know what you know is by going through the certification. And the advantage is if you're working in a company, most of the companies actually pay for you to take the exam. I think the CAPM exam is around $200. The PMP is around $700, but that is a good investment. I think there is one project manager who actually said that if you find somebody to shadow who is a project manager or working in a project, even if it is during your own free time, that is something that is commendable. So make sure that you do that. And I also wanted to make sure that those interviews that you did, at least they help you to create some relationships, some networks that you can use down the road. So also some of them talked about the software that they use, and most of them say they use Microsoft Project. Some of them use Microsoft Excel, Microsoft Word, and on like that. Like I've mentioned before, Microsoft Project is not the only software that you can use for helping you to make schedule and keep them and keep your project updated. But if you know how to use Microsoft Project, the concept are the same because they use some features that we'll be looking at later on, like Gantt charts and things like that. So make sure that at least you watch these videos. They are for 2016. But if you want to supplement them, I'm sure there are some on the internet for 2016 and on like that. So there is a document that I'm actually going to post maybe by tonight, and that's like a document that will walk you through how to go about working on Microsoft 2016. So if you have the software, there is a project that you can try to work on and try to input that, and that can give you an idea about how to go working with the software. It's always good if at least you have an idea about what the software that is being used in a class that you're taking works. So that is the information from last week. And like I mentioned in the video, in the email that I sent, I think most of you did a very impressive job with the interviews. Okay, so we also went through the week 2 and we mentioned about the same concept, the IT project management and the IT context. And I said, although we're talking about IT, don't let that take you out. The concepts are going to be the same, whether we are in health care or you're working in construction or which other area you're working on. Project management concepts are the same. Any questions so far?
No, sir.
Okay, so for this week, we are in week 3, and the only assessment that we have for this week is only the discussion. And this discussion, we are going to be doing it through the voice thread. So these are the instruction, and we're going to be working on a question that asks us to look at the 5 process groups, and we'll look at this before the end of the class. So there are usually 5 process group. And if you remember last week, we mentioned about the life of a project. We talked about the project life cycle, and we said a project goes through a number of phases. So we have 5 process groups. So we have initiating, planning, executing, monitoring, and controlling, and then closing. And we'll go into more details about this. And now the question says, what are some of the typical challenges project teams face during each of the 5 process groups? So you don't have to tell me about all of them, but you can maybe pick 3 challenges and talk about them. Okay, so we say that you can frame your discussion based on a project described in one of the feature boxes in this chapter, for example, in what went right or what went wrong feature. Or you can also frame your discussion on one of the PMI's Project of the Year awards or on the well-known project failures like the Denver International Airport baggage handling system. So there is this project in Denver where they were trying to install a new baggage handling system, and there was a lot of issue, a lot of problem with this. And basically, when you're talking about the problems, it boils down to things like the cost. So when you're working on a project, if you don't do very good cost estimation, the project can go out of way. If you did not do a very good scope statement at the beginning, the project can have what you call the scope creep, whereby you have things that are being added on the project. Also, if you when you're collecting what's called the requirement, when you're trying to determine exactly what needs to be done in a project, that's what you call requirements gathering. And if you don't get the right requirements, then when you're going to be implementing the project, then you might have problem. If you don't have qualified staff, you can have problem. So there's different issues that can arise in the life of the project, and that's what you're going to be talking about. So we'll talk about some of these issues in the course of the lecture today. But when you come back to this discussion board question, you're going to pick maybe like you say during the initiating process. That's when we try to determine what exactly are we going to be working on the project. And there's some things that you have to do during that process. And if you don't do them right, then you'll have a problem in the project. Something like estimating. If you don't do the right estimating, you don't use the right estimating techniques to determine the cost of the project, then you have a problem of running out of money. Okay, the same thing. If you don't do the right estimating in terms of the schedule, and you decide that the project is going to take 6 months and you have not done that properly, after 6 months, you might not be able to deliver the end product. If you don't have qualified staff when you start your project, then that can be a problem. Are we together?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so those are some of the things that you're going to be talking about. And what you're going to do is you'll determine which phase of the project you're going to be talking about. Like for instance, in the monitoring and controlling, this is where you make sure that the project is hitting the milestones. So you're doing exactly what you said you're going to be doing. And you can think of somebody like if somebody is running a marathon and they want to do maybe a 10-minute mile pace. So every mile they do 10 minutes, another mile 10 minutes. So on the third mile, they should be there by 30 minutes. Now, what can happen to make sure that to make them not able to reach the third mile in 30 minutes? Maybe the shoes are not working properly, right? Maybe they have a stomach crunch. So that's what you're talking about in terms of, and then you can go ahead and do the monitoring. So if somebody has a stomach cramp, maybe you can help them to breathe properly or something like that. In terms of the closing, when it comes time to close the project, so basically what you do at the closing is where you deliver the product or the service. So you make sure that the customer gets the output or the deliverable and he's comfortable with the product. And then some things that you can do is, remember we said in some of the companies, employees work on projects, and when the project is done, that group, they lose their job. So as a project manager, you have to come up with a process of helping those employees to survive. That's called the life after the project. So sometimes you have to help them sign up for unemployment benefits. Sometimes you have to write them letters of recommendation when they're looking for work outside. So those are things that you do during the closing phase of the project. And also you have to go back and look at what's called the knowledge learned. What is it that we did right? What didn't we do right? What can we do different? So you're going to pick a few of those points and then work on them, and then you decide how you're going to do that, and then you'll click on this button here, and I don't know, okay, perfect, it's taking us there, and then you'll come here to the discussion board and you'll click on this link here, and then you read. These are the same instructions just in case somebody has forgotten them, and you can see this button down here is moving. If you comfortable with this, you can just click right here, and then that moves you to the next slide. So it's 2 slides before you start recording, and this is a slide that gives you the instructions on what you should be doing. Okay, so please make sure your video is clear, understandable, blah blah blah. Your grade will be comprised of how you present, blah 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 blah, all the way like that. So you have 4 minutes for your initial comment, and then 2 minutes for your reply. And then once you're comfortable with that, you click on this button here. I want to make sure you can say that. So you'll click on this button here, and then you come ahead and then you record. So you make a recording of your response. And then once you finish doing that, you'll come back and then make sure at least you watch 3 of your friends. So the videos should be around here, and then make sure you watch at least 3 of your videos and comment. So some of you, I think you just posted the initial video before during the introduction and you never came back to comment. You have to comment. That's the only way that you're going to be able to get full credit. Okay, so you have to come back and then listen to what somebody said and then go ahead and comment. And when you're making the comment, make sure that you're adding value to the conversation. Okay, so don't just say I agree with you. This is an online class. You're trying to make sure that at least we have some sort of interaction. And being an MBA class, we also want to make sure that you're creating those networks and those relationships. And more so, we're also learning from each other. So that is the part of the assignment for this week. Now you have to make sure that you post your first post by, I think, Friday. I gave you one more day because of the holiday yesterday. And then by Sunday, you should have finished. So by Friday, at least you should have answered the question. Are we together on that part?
If you don't mind just showing where is that located again in Blackboard?
It's just under the assignment, the assess folder.
Okay, gotcha.
Any other question?
No, sir.
Okay, so somebody mentioned about in the assignment, so we'll come back to that anyway. Let's see what's the material for this week. And I'll share this file with you. And this is chapter 3. And we're looking at what's called the project management process groups, a case study. Now we won't go through all of these slides, we'll just hit the key point ones. So the 5 project management process group, we'll look at those, and then we have the activities for each. and then you'll try to understand the project management process, how they relate to the knowledge areas. So that's the heart of the project management, is what you have the knowledge areas and then the 5 process group. And the process groups are very similar to what we call the project life cycle. And then you'll see how companies can develop projects based on these techniques. Okay, so a process is nothing else but is a series of actions directed towards a particular result. So when you go grocery shopping, there is usually a process that you follow. So you walk in some of the stores, you pick a cart, and then you walk through the aisle. And actually what they have done is they have changed now the process because of the COVID. Now, usually most of the grocery stores, they have somebody who is cleaning the cart and they ask you whether you need one, they give you a clean one and all the way like that. So you get your cart, you go in, you put the stuff in your cart, and then you walk through the store. When it's time for you to check out, you go through the self-checkout register if you want to do that, or you can use a human being. And then when you finish checking, they bag your stuff, get the card out, put the stuff in your bag, in your car. And if you are among the few who return the cart place, you return the cart to the right place. Now, there's actually a study that was done that showed that there is a specific type of people who never return the cards to their location. So somebody did a research and they found that there is a personality, there is a personality type that never returns the card. So anyhow, so that's what you're calling a process, okay? A series of actions directed towards a particular result. So we talk about project management process. So a project management can also be viewed as a number of interlinked processes. Remember we said a project has a unique beginning and an end. It's a unique endeavor that has a beginning and an end. So that beginning and the end, that duration can be broken down into what you're calling processes. And usually it's made up of these 5. We have what you're calling the initiating process. So this is where we decide to work on the project. What is it that you're going to be working on? And then we plan how are we going to accomplish that. And then we start executing, doing the actual work. And then we monitor and control to make sure that whatever you decided to do is the right way. And then you do what's called the closing process. So this is going to be the final. These are steps that you'll see if you're doing the CAPM or the PMP exam. They'll kind of like to ask you a question and they ask you the order in which they follow each other. So you have to know is you start with the initiating and then you plan, you execute, you monitor, and then you close. And you look into this in more details. So depending on how you want your project to be, there is a research that was done, and they say that the time that you spend on each process group determines how successful your project is going to be. So you can start from here and we say so they did a research and they are comparing 2 different types of project managers, regular project managers and what they call alpha project managers. So you might have heard about what's called alpha male or alpha female. So anybody want to help us by telling us what they understand by the word alpha male or alpha female?
I just know the alpha means the beginning.
I'm sorry?
The beginning, or someone
Or
in like top leadership.
the dominant or head, male or female.
Okay, perfect. And the other lady, what were you saying? Somebody was saying something different.
I was saying the dominant or head, male or female.
Okay, perfect. So there's some people who are called the alpha, and usually like when you're talking about the human behavior, okay, the alpha male, the alpha female, these are dominant, focused, goal-oriented, things like that. Okay, so they did a study and they say that spending more time on planning should pay off in the execution. So you can see that for the alpha males, okay, they spend more time on the planning. And then of course, when it comes time for them to execute, they take less time. Now, you have to always make sure that initiating does not take a long time because you're just getting sometimes an order from your company, or maybe a client tells you, we want to update our system, work on that. Now, we just implemented a cybersecurity lab at the School of Business. And that project is still ongoing. I think it has been ongoing since when? Since the beginning of this year, actually. We got a grant from anonymous donor for $300,000, and we started working on the project in March. So the project is still ongoing. So the initiating part did not take a lot of time. The execution is actually the one that has been ongoing for a long time because we started planning the lab, buying the furniture and the laptops and the servers all the way in May, and you're still going on. We just finished now. The students are some students are actually taking the class, but we're still finalizing some few things. So executing takes much more time. Now planning, there is something that's called the planning analysis, and you might come across that. And that means that some people, they just keep on planning, like they never start doing the actual work. You just keep planning, planning, and they come up with a plan, and then they change another plan, and then they change, and before you realize, you're actually late. Is synonymous sometimes with the ladies, like when you're trying to pick the right dress for a dinner out. Sometimes you can spend a lot of time. You put on that one, you take it out, blah blah. So that's similar to what you're calling paralysis analysis. Okay, and then closing doesn't take that much time. So most of the time is actually spent in the execution. That's another question they like to ask in the CAPM or the PMP exam, because that's where you're doing most of the work and most of the resources are going to be used in the executing. The risk, in terms of the risk is actually higher during these early stages, initiating and planning. You have higher risk, but you don't use a lot of resources. When you are in the monitoring and controlling the stages, the risk is much lower because you already know what you're doing most of the time, okay? And then you're not using a lot of resources because you've already used most of them in the execution. So that's another way that they try to ask that question in terms of risk and the resources. At which stage of the project are you using a lot of resources, and at which stage of the project is the risk higher? So just be aware of that. And the reason why the risk is higher at the beginning is because sometimes you don't have everything laid out. You don't have everything laid out. You're still trying to figure things out. Okay, so if you want to go online, you can check at this Government Accountability Office. And let me see whether we can pull something really quick here. The Government Accountability Office. And I'll share with you so you can see what I'm doing, because you might need to do this at your own free time. And what I'll do is I'm gonna move from there and share a clean tab, I think. So where am I? Is it new tab? Okay. And what I'll do is I'll type here. So this is GAO. So GAO is Government Accountability Office, and then you can just say report on US government projects, and that's just a Google search, and it will bring you to this page, and you can just click on any of these sites. So if I click on this, it tells me some information on what is going on with the federal government. So the General Services Administration spends hundreds of millions of dollars annually to build or modernize federal offices, courthouses, and other buildings. So these are projects that are done by the government, okay? And then you can come here like to the highlights and you can see what is happening. So these are the things that they are doing and how much money they are spending. And then you can see whether they are going over the budget, over the schedule, and things like that. So these are some of the projects that the government has been doing. And then this is what this office found. As the federal government landlord, you spends hundreds of millions of dollars to construct, blah, 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 blah. But you find that the government usually sometimes has a lot of waste in the projects that they carry out. And this report, sometimes they go ahead and they tell you about why that is happening. Okay, so these are some of the things that you can read about, and you'll learn a little bit more about the government project. So all what it was type GAO report, and then from this you can look at maybe something about the NASA, and we expect cost increases. And so this is right there. You see, we're already talking about the triple constraints. Okay, we have talked about the triple constraint, and you can see they're already talking about cost increase and schedule delays. So that's projects are going to take longer for major programs or for major programs to get worse. Why? And then they tell you about that. Okay, so this is some information that you can actually Google and learn a little bit about the government projects, because this is available out there. Most of the companies will not have this information out there, because for most of the companies, most of the projects that they implement, they're kind of like business secrets. Okay, they don't want a lot of companies knowing what they are working on and on like that. Okay, so read this. It's very, very important, the Government Accountability Office, and you might have had this Also in the Congress, sometimes they come to report on government waste and things like that. So it helps you to be able to see where your money is going. Okay, any questions so far?
No, sir.
Okay, okay. When we are here, maybe I can go through here and see. So in the questionnaire, we talked about the PMI Project of the Year award, and we said you can use that as an example of the problems that you can, as an example to see what are some of the problems that you can encounter in the process group. So if you go to Google and you just do PMI Project of the Year award, and you press the enter key. I think your book gives you some examples, but also here on the internet, you'll be able to get more specific examples, and you can see some of the companies that have actually won those awards recently. So here there's a very nice video. I think if you watch this video, they talk about things like the cost, they talk about the schedule and how this airline was actually able to meet their objective on time and how that helped them to be more competitive. So this is an award that is given by the Project Management Institute. And if you click here, they also talk a little bit more about how you're going to be eligible, and they talk about the winners, and you see the awards. Let's see what they have in here. Does it open in the same page? Okay, very good. Yeah, so you can see that's the video that you're watching about that Brazilian airline. And then you can watch a little bit more if you want to do another one previous year, all the way like that. And the way I got this is just PMI Project of the Year award. So that gives you some information. Then you can use that to say what is it that the company did very well. And remember, if they did something very well, it was successful. If they had not done that something very well, they might not have been successful. So you can actually flip that and tell me that this is what would have led to the problem. Make sense?
Yes,
Yes.
it does.
Okay, so let me go ahead here and go back to application. And for, okay, so we mentioned about those two, Government Accountability Office, Media Snapshot, you can look at that. Now, mapping the process group, the knowledge area. So usually what you'll be seeing is something like this, but I want to give you like kind of like a full snapshot. Let me see whether I can get it. I think I had a picture of all of them, the 10 knowledge areas, all in one chat. And I think your book might have it somewhere. So I apologize for back and forth, but it is what it is, like some people say. Entire screen or application. Is that? I hope so. Okay, can you see that?
Yes, just popped up.
Okay, so you can see all the way from number 4 to number 13.
Yes.
Okay, so this is actually what you're calling the mapping of the process group and the 10 knowledge areas. If you ever take the CAPM exam or the PMP exam, you'll need to know this. And this is part of what I said is called memory dump. So whichever technique you use, you want to cram, you want to do whatever, put it in your head, and then when you get to come to the room and you're doing the exam, they give you a book called to write some, for like a scrapbook. Write this down, generate this table, and have it there. And then when you start taking the exam, they'll be asking questions, and you can just refer and know where the question is coming from. So we have 10 knowledge area. If you've ever taken a project management class, you'll hear about the 10 knowledge areas. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Those are the 10 knowledge areas. And then we have the 5 process group. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you have to map the 10 knowledge areas with a 5 process group. And basically in each, there are some activities that you go through. Now the PMP, the PMI, PIM book, the project management body of knowledge, goes into more details because they have what you're calling the input and the output and things like that. But for now, this is what you need to know at this level. So you start with the project integration. That's what you're looking at. And then you have to develop what you're calling a project charter. So in the initiating process, you go through what you're calling the requirements. You're given an assignment or you have a contract to develop a project. And before you start working on that project as a project manager, you have to come up with what you're calling a project charter. So this is actually the document that authorizes you to start spending the company resources. And then in the planning, you come up with the project management plan. So in the exam, they like to ask you in the planning process, what is going to be the document that you develop in the project integration management stage. So that's the project management plan. And then in the executing, what are you doing? In the executing process, you're directing and managing the project, and then you're also managing what? Knowledge. And then you go to monitoring and controlling, and then you have the closing phase. So as we move forward, we'll be going through the project scope management, and then you're going to be looking at these activities here. We'll go through the schedule, look at these activities, go through the cost, look at these activities, all the way like that. Now, planning is actually where you're going to be doing a lot of activities. And you see that planning has something in each of the 10 knowledge areas. Okay, initiating, you only do the integration and then the project stakeholder, and that's it. But the planning you have everywhere. The same thing with monitoring. Monitoring also has something because you have to make sure that the project is going on well. And in each of the 10 knowledge areas under the monitoring, like for instance, when you come up with a scope, you have to validate the scope. Validate the scope means that you have to authenticate, make sure that whatever it is that you're working on is the right thing. And then you also have to make sure that you control so that you don't have what you're calling the scope creep. Not things are being added. If you're building a house and it says it's going to be a 3-bedroom house, and the owner comes and looks at it and says, maybe I should have a fourth bedroom, you need to make sure that you're taking care of it. That's a change from the original what? Scope. So you have to make sure that you control that. If he needs to have a fourth bedroom, then you have to go through what's called the change process. And there are some documents that need to be signed because that might impact the budget. It might impact what? The schedule. Okay. The same thing with the schedule, you have to control the schedule. If the project is taking 1 year, you have to make sure that you're hitting the milestones, that you can stay within the 1 year. And if you start running behind, then you have to take corrective measures. Now we are going to be looking at some of the tools and some of the techniques that we can use to help us in controlling the schedule. So remember we talked about these are the 5 process groups, and we are saying what are some of the problems that can occur when somebody is working on a project. So that's your discussion question. So you can pick one right here and you say the schedule. Okay, so what might happen if you don't have a good way of controlling your schedule? Then your project might run into problems. Same thing with cost management. If you're not using the right tools to help you in controlling the cost, okay, that can be a problem. Now, something happens in the cost management because you start working on a project and the budget is 1 million, and then hurricane comes around and that disrupts the supply chain. Or sometimes hurricane comes around and a lot of houses are destroyed. Then what does that mean? The prices of lumber goes up. Okay, now we have COVID. There are very many companies that are working on projects, and now we have COVID, and you don't have employees who can work on a site. So those are things that you have to think about. Okay, and you can see how something like that can impact the what, the schedule, the budget, all the way, even quality. Okay, you have to make sure that you're managing the quality. Resource management, you have the right employees, you have the right infrastructure, you're using the right communication channels, you're managing the risk, all the way like that. So that's what we mean by you pick one or two of these process groups and then see what might impact your project. Are we together?
Yes.
Can you just repeat that last part again, please?
Let's say that again.
Can you just repeat that last part again, please?
So what I was trying to explain, okay, let me see what I can click. That is what you see.
When you were saying picking the 5 parts.
Yeah, so you have the 5 process groups here, and the assignment says that you pick any. Let's see whether we can read the question. So the question says a process is a series of action directed towards a particular result. Project management can be viewed as a number of interlinked processes. The project management process group includes those 5. Now you can map the main activities of each process group into 10 knowledge areas. We already saw that, how we are mapping that, correct?
Yeah.
Are you there? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, what are some of the typical challenges project teams face during each of the 5 process groups? So you can frame your discussion based on a project described in one of the feature boxes, or you can also frame your discussion. So basically what we are saying is you have these 5 process groups, and then you have the 10 knowledge areas. So if you're working, let's say something like the schedule. The schedule is how long the project is going to take. So one of the challenges that you can face is if you don't do the proper planning when you're coming up with a schedule, because there are some techniques that you can use to help you with planning. Now, the way we are looking at it, if you don't do the proper planning, then what will happen is that your project is you're going to underestimate or you're going to overestimate, because it can be both ways. And then your project will be way, way out of line with what should be. So you look at something like when you're planning the process, you define the activities. What do we mean by defining the activities? Think of something like a very simple project, like planning a birthday party. A birthday party will have what? People will come in, maybe they have a few
Games.
drinks, okay? And then they have what? A cake is going to be cut at one point, and then, so what are things that you'll have to have? You might have chairs, you might have music, and on like that. So you have to define the things that are going to be done. If you don't do that properly, then what will happen? You might have more people coming in than you expected, or you might have less people coming in. You might not have enough food, okay? Or you might have too much food. Make sense?
Yes.
And then sequence the activities. So if you just look at how you don't do that, you define all the activities and then you sequence the activities. So people will come in, they get a drink, and then they get the food, and then they do a little bit of mingling, and then there's going to be what? They cut the cake, and then after cutting the cake, maybe they present, they give the gift, the present, blah blah blah, and on like that. And then you estimate the activity duration. So based on how many activities you have, then you can tell how long your party is gonna last. Because if cutting the cake is gonna take 5 minutes, if the drinks are gonna take 5 minutes, if eating is gonna take 30 minutes, if mingling is gonna take 15 minutes, then you'll know your party is going to take what? 1 hour. Now, if you're doing this activity at a location where you are renting, then you'll need to be very specific on your what? On your activities. Make sense?
Yes.
Because if you go out of time, then what happens? You end up paying more. So that's what we mean by that. So you can see, like in the planning, you have to go through all this. The same thing in cost management. Okay, you have to do the right estimating of the cost. If you don't estimate the cost, then what happens? You'll either be what? Short, or you'll be what?
Over.
Over the budget. Yep, that's why people will always tell you, make sure that you have a budget. And most of us don't have that. Okay?
Okay.
It's very difficult to keep a budget actually. You know? Yeah. So project quality management, you have to plan quality management. Okay. What is quality? How do you define quality? Right? That's very important. In a project, you have to define quality. If somebody's going to be planning a party for you, you want to have a good time, right?
Yes.
How do you define good time?
Making sure everyone's happy, satisfied, content.
Yeah, and how do you define that? I'm not asking you to define it, but think of it, because anytime that you're working on a project, you need to have, that's the output. If somebody is hosting a party for you and you're paying them to make sure that you have a good time, like we like to say, we need to be very sure what you mean by good time. Okay?
Gotcha.
Yep. So all the way down like that. The same thing with the resource and all the way down like that. So this is what you're going to be thinking about. And when you look at those videos about the best project management, they say things that they did right so that their project was correct. And then you can flip that and look at the things if they had not done those things right. And the same way, we just went through that. So you have some ideas about there. Okay, if you control the cost, so it means that if the project is going, if you have budgeted something like 1,000 for your party, and then you realize that your budget is coming to 1,500, then what happens? You have to cut some things, right?
Right.
Yep. So that's part of that. Okay, so let's see, we can cover a few more items and this is an application. We share that. Okay, so this is just that breakdown that we went through, and it shows you the different. So we have the processes here, and then we have the knowledge areas. We start with the integration, project scope, all the way like that. Okay, so this all covered down like that. Okay, so usually we have what we are calling methodologies, so which is how things should be done, and then we talk about the standards, which describes what should be done, and we have Prince. This Prince 2 is actually very similar. In the US, we have what's called the PIM book, Project Management Body of Knowledge. In Europe, they have what they call the Prince 2, which is nothing else but this is an acronym for Projects in Controlled Environment 2. Okay, that's Prince 2. And then we have Agile. We talked about that technique for working with projects. Then we have the RUP, and then of course Six Sigma. So some of these you can actually Google, like if you just do Six Sigma, we'll talk about it in more details when you look at quality. Okay, but Six Sigma is a concept that is borrowed from statistics. If you have taken a statistics class, you might have heard about Sigma, which is nothing else but is what? Standard deviation. So when you have some numbers, you compute the what? The average or the mean, and then from the mean, you move the what? Variance, and then from variance, you have standard deviation, and then that tells you how the values are different from each other. Okay, so with Sigma, we have a concept that's called the Six Sigma, okay, which means is a quality control mechanism that is used to minimize waste. Okay, it was popularized by GE. So we'll talk about this a little bit when we go back to quality management. Remember, quality is part of what you're calling the six project management, the knowledge areas. Let's see, procurement, stakeholder. Okay, yeah, so it's down there somewhere. Okay, so a few things there. What went right? Some of the projects were successful. We talked about the waste and why we need project management. Some of the cases, these are more specific to the IT. So in the initiation stage, so what do we do in the initiation stage? So we determine what? The scope, the time and cost constraints for the project. So what you're doing is at the beginning, we determine what are we going to do, how long is it going to take, and how much it's going to cost. Okay, so when you're given a project, somebody will tell you, I want you to build me a 3-bedroom single family home, and I want to move in 6 months. Okay, they give you the scope, they've given you the time, and then at a cost of XYZ dollars. Okay, and then you have to identify project sponsor, usually the person who is what? Sponsoring that project, or who is providing the funds for that project. So usually sometimes it's called the client, it's called the customer, and sometimes this sponsor can be the government entity. Sometimes it can be an internal customer. So if you work in an organization and you're in the IT, you might be implementing a project for the accounting department and vice versa. So the sponsor can be internal or external. And then we determine who is a project manager. So in the initiation stage, if we don't get the right project manager, that can be a problem. Because if the project manager is not well qualified, if we are not giving people jobs because of who they know, not because of their skills, that can be a problem. And then you come up with a business case. So business case, like I mentioned before, is a justification for why that project is required. So you want to make sure that you're implementing a project because it meets the objective of the organization, not those kind of projects that we call a bridge to nowhere. And then you meet with a project manager and determine what needs to be done, and you break it into small projects. So that's what you do in the pre, and then in the actual initiation, then you go about and you start now working on the different parts of the project. So you recognize and start a new project, and the three main goals, you work on them. So knowledge area is the project integration management and the project stakeholder management. So usually in the CAPM exam and the PMP exam, they'll ask you what are the knowledge areas that are involved in the initiating process and what is the output for that. So if you remember that chart that I showed you, the one that had all the 10 areas, Anybody home?
Yes.
Okay, so
Yes.
I'm going to share that a little bit because that's going to be a little bit easier for you to understand. And I'm sorry for keep going back and forth. We're almost done here. Let me share this. This was an application. I think it's there here. So you can see that. So in the initiating process, we only have two knowledge areas: integration and stakeholder. Initiating, we only have integration, and this is the output: project charter, and then we have a stakeholder document. So we identify who are the stakeholders, and from there we are going to develop a document that shows all our stakeholders, who are our stakeholders and what are their responsibilities and how do we communicate with them, and on like that. So in the initiating process group, we only have the project integration management knowledge area and the project stakeholder management area, and not and the project stakeholder management. And we only have develop, project charter, there's the output, and then the stakeholder management plan. So if we go back here, that's what they're trying to show us through this screen here. You see that? The knowledge area, integration management, and the stakeholder, the initiating process, develop project charter, identify the stakeholder, and the output is the project charter. So this is a document that authorizes the project manager to start working on the project. And then we have the stakeholder register. So this is a list of all the stakeholders. Okay, and this, remember, we say the stakeholder are going to be people who support the project and the ones who don't support the project. Are we together?
Yes.
Yeah, so remember that, because you're going to be seeing this, especially if you go to take the CAPM or the PMP exam, you will be seeing those relationships. They have the knowledge area, initiating process, and then the output. So we talked about the stakeholder register. It's very important that you identify all the stakeholders. And as a project manager, you want to have a list like this. So you have all the stakeholders and the position that they have in the organization, whether they are internal or external, and the role that they play. So the role also determines their interest in the project. So somebody, is this project very important to them? Because if it's a very important project to them, then you need to make sure that you're keeping them informed of what is happening. Okay. And even the people who don't support you, you need to know them and keep a record of them. And then these are the different contact information and how you're going to be communicating with them. Some people will also have this document that's called the stakeholder management strategy. This is kind of like a secret document that you want to have as a project manager. You don't want this to be in the public domain, because you can see what we have here is the name, the level, influence, and then this here. So this is whereby you know who the people are and how they like to be communicated with, and something specific about them. Okay, so Joe likes to stay on top of key projects and make money, have a lot of short face-to-face meetings, and focus on achieving the financial benefits of the project. Okay, Louise has a lot of things on her plate and she does not seem excited about this project. She may be looking at other job opportunities. Show her how this project will help the company and her resume. Okay, so and then you have another detailed list like that. So that will help you to be able to know how to communicate with the different stakeholders. Okay, so project charters and kickoff meeting. So this is another vocabulary. Kickoff meeting, they tend to ask you what is a kickoff meeting. So before the beginning of a project, usually most of the teams will have a kickoff meeting. When is the NFL starting?
Thursday night and then Sunday night.
Okay, so that's the night. So what happens before the game? What do the teams do?
Practice.
They practice, then they have somewhere in the middle, they have, maybe it's done in the locker room, I don't know, like a huddle or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then they say 1, 2, 3, blah 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 blah, hip hip hip. That's their kickoff meeting.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so that's what you mean by that. So you do this at the beginning of a project, and usually is where you meet all the people who the team members, and you explain to them what's going to be happening, and off you go. Okay. So some companies actually do this offsite. So you have like all the people who are working on a project, and you take them to an offsite location, and you have a meeting there. You set your goals, your objectives. You know each other, and you get rejuvenated and you start working on that. It's very important. So this is a question that you might see in the exam. It talks about the kickoff meeting. And this is kind of like an agenda for that. So you can go through that. And then from there, you start working on the planning. So you have the initiating, now you're in the planning stage. Okay. So this is whereby you're going to look at how the planning is going to guide your execution. Remember, we said if you spend more time in the planning, your execution is going to be much, much easier. So some of the things that you'll have in the planning is you come up with what's called the team contract. So people have sometimes sign a contract, say that I'm working on this project, blah, blah, blah. And then you have the scope statement. So this is the document that actually outlines what needs to be done. What is it that we are working on this project? Okay. We are working on developing a new cybersecurity lab. Okay. And then you have a work breakdown structure. So we look at this in more details, but this is nothing else but is a breakdown of all the activities that are going to be involved there. So for our cybersecurity lab, we had to redesign the computer lab. We had to take out the old desk and put in new desk. We had to put in bring in new laptops. We had to bring in servers, projectors, all the way like that. So that's part of the work breakdown structure. And then you have a Gantt chart. So this is nothing else but is a document that shows the relationship between the different activities in the project. Okay, so you'll be seeing this also. Gantt chart is part of the vocabulary of project management. And then you have a list of risk. It's very, very important because we say that project usually have a lot of risk because they are unique, never been done before. So the risk is going to be there. And they are usually what you call the positive risk and negative risk. So we also have something that we call the assumptions. So in the planning, if you don't think about the risk, that can be a problem. Because remember I said, if you are in the construction industry and you're building in a location that is what is called the tornado area, you need to take some precautions because anything can happen. If it's during the hurricane season, if it's during the earthquake, okay? So that's part of coming up with your risk. So you have an example of a Gantt chart here that shows all the activities for this project and then how they are related and what needs to be done before you can start others. So this shows the duration of the project. So like for instance, the executing is going to take all this period, but it's going to be broken down into what? The survey. So why do you need a survey? Because you need to be able to get some data from some people who are working on this project or outside. User inputs all the way like that. Any questions?
No, sir, not so far.
Okay, so these are some of the risks that you might encounter. Lack of input from internal consultants, so lack of input from client representatives. So when you're doing the planning, if you don't get input from these stakeholders, that can be a problem. And now you can see you're getting answers to your what? To your discussion board. Okay. Outsourcing, purchasing for the article. So for this case, they were doing some outsourcing, and that can be a problem also. Now we know around March, there was no communication, no travel from China. And then after that, there was no travel to Europe. So if you have a company that's doing a lot of outsourcing or insourcing, that was going to be a problem. Okay. And you have to come up with a way to work around that. Okay. So that can be some of the issues that you face. Then you go to the executing phase, and this takes the most time and resources to perform the execution. So this is where you're actually doing the work. Okay, now this is where your leadership skills will come in handy. Okay, and that's where emotional intelligence, where you have to be able to carry the water. Okay, and also know who are the people in the organization who can help you if you're having some issues, some of the resources. So a milestone, you'll see that word. So milestone is nothing else but is a specific stage in a project. Okay, and you have milestone reports that can help you to focus on completing major milestones. So what you do is by June, by September 25th, we should have done XYZ. The foundation should be done. That's the milestone. And then by November 5th, we should have the structure up. So if you're not hitting those milestones, then you know something is not right, and then you have to make sure that you make the correction. Okay, so this is an example of a report that shows you the milestone with the dates, okay, and whether they have been completed, and then you have the person who is responsible for that. I think there was somebody who actually interviewed somebody who told them about something called the RACI, okay, who is responsible, who is accountable, okay, who should be informed, who should be consulted. So that's something that you should have as a project manager. It's called the RACI chart. Okay, it shows you, because it's not everybody who needs to be told everything. So project managers need to have a document that shows the different stakeholders and what they need to be told when. Okay, so we talked about the PMI, Project of the Year Award. So best practices, if you want to look at that, you can see what they did well. And then also you can look at this document here, read about this city and see what they did. Okay, monitoring and controlling, you're measuring the progress towards the completion. And also you're trying to make sure that everything is going well and is also done through the project lifecycle. So monitoring and controlling is one of those activities that have something in each of the knowledge areas. Okay, and some of the output will include reports, because the reports are the ones that are going to be telling you that you're doing the right thing. So you generate the reports and then you look at the report and you see, if this is where we're supposed to be, yes. If not, we have to take corrective measure. And this is what you call the change request. Time there is a change in the project, either from a stakeholder or from within the project, there has to be a change request. So there is a formal process that has to be used in making changes to a project. And they like to ask that in the exam. So we have to go through the change request. And then you have updates. So if you make a change and that change has been accepted, then you have to go through the updates. It's just like you're changing the grade. If you want your grade to be changed, there is a process that you have to follow. There are some documents that you have to fill in, and the same thing that happens in the project. Okay, and then once that has been approved, then you have to make some changes. Okay, so final thing is closing. So you gain the stakeholder and the customer acceptance of the final product and service. And like we said, a project can be closed because we have reached the end, or it can also be closed because it was canceled, it was taking too long, and we are not meeting the objective. Okay, so irrespective of how the project is closed, we should have an formal project closing phase. Okay, and then we have some of the outputs. So they'd like to ask which are the outputs. You have project files, and then most important is the lessons learned. Okay, this is very, very important. There are very few companies actually that do this, the lessons learned, because this, once the project is finished, people don't really care about anything after that. Okay, it's like you win the Super Bowl. You're like, okay, yeah, we're done. Come on. Okay, but actually now you need to go back and look at what is it that did well, do very well. How can you improve that? Okay, so lessons learned is very, very important. And that leads to what you call the knowledge management. So when you have lessons learned, you can actually document them and quantify them and store them in the organization. So in the future project, before people start working on a project, they need to go and read what happened in the past. Okay, so that they'll know what went right, what didn't go well, how can we improve on that. And then you have process assets, so the employees, and then resources, and all the way like that. So final report and presentation to the sponsor. So I think,
Excuse me, Professor.
yes,
Real fast, can you go back to the closing part real fast?
project closing right there.
So number 2, when it says even projects are not completed, they should be closed out. What is that? What exactly does that mean?
Okay, so remember we say that it's not always that in an ideal situation, you close the project because you have achieved the objective. So you are working on a customer's project and you finish working on the product and they accept the product and they move on, correct?
Yes.
But there are going to be some projects that are going to be closed because of various reasons. Like for instance, a project is just taking too much money. And this is actually very common with government. So some of the projects are just like a bridge to nowhere. They're just taking in more money and we don't see any end in sight.
Gotcha.
So the project is cancelled. So even if it's cancelled, there should be a formal closing process. Because
Understood.
usually what will happen is the people who are working on that project have to either be reassigned to other project or they have to be fired. So that's part of the project closing phase.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Sure. Okay, so that takes us that informed decision. I think you can look at that. Scrum. So this is usually in software. So we won't go much into that, but this is some of the concept that you'll have. Like I say, the PMI has an exam that you can actually take for Scrum. So if you want to do that, study this, but you'll find these Scrum roles, usually they are found in IT software development projects. Okay, so unless there is a question, I think we are gonna stop there.
Nope, no questions for me.
Okay, so let me stop this recording and then maybe we can